Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Anup Kapoor, and I'm the Senior Product Manager for the Autoscaling service. In this webinar, I am excited to share with you a new feature in EC2 Autoscaling that will let you save up to 90%. Earlier this year, we launched EC2 Fleet, an API that allows you to combine purchase options and instance types in a single fleet using the same API call. My colleagues Boyd and Chad did a webinar a couple of months ago, for which I'm pasting the link below, in which they gave detailed insights into the wide variety of instance types and purchase options such as on-demand, reserved instances, and spot instances that are available to you. They also went into great details on the benefits and use cases for easily launching your capacity across multiple pricing options and instance types. If you haven't watched that webinar already, I would highly recommend you to do so. They also shared with you that we will be bringing the EC2 fleet functionality to EC2 autoscaling, and that is precisely what this new feature is all about. As for the agenda, we'll do a quick overview on what EC2 autoscaling is. Then we'll do a deep dive on configuring your autoscaling groups with multiple purchase options and instances. And we'll follow that with a demo. So what is EC2 autoscaling? EC2 autoscaling provides a simple and automatic way to provision instances with the right software. Once you have the instances up and running, it removes the effort for managing that provisioned capacity. It does so by automatically replacing unhealthy instances without any manual intervention and balancing your EC2 instances across availability zones. And this is one of the AWS well-architected best practices. With the new feature that we're talking about today, it also allows you to provision capacity across multiple purchase options and instance types. And finally, it helps you with easily optimizing the provisioning for cost and performance by automatically growing and shrinking the capacity as the amount of traffic or load to your application changes. A quick recap on what an autoscaling group or an ASG is, as you will hear and use this term over and over again. An ASG is a logical group of your EC2 instances. So for example, if you have a lot of EC2 instances that run collectively to power the front end of your website, all these EC2 instances would be a part of a single ASG. The ASG is bound by the minimum and maximum capacity. The number of instances in the ASG will not go beyond the max you specify, so you don't have to worry about the fear of runaway scaling or cost overruns. And similarly, it won't go below the minimum size either. Desired is what determines the number of instances that should be running in the ASG at any given time. And this will be between the min and the max. So the ASG would either launch instances or terminate instances so as to meet the desired capacity. As far as EC2 autoscaling helping you automatically add or remove instances as the load to your application changes, the most simple way is for you to manually go in and simply update any of these parameters, and the ASG will launch or terminate instances to get to the new state. The second is scaling based on a schedule. So for example, you need your instances to be up all day long between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. and then reduce the capacity after hours. You can do so using scheduled actions. The third is dynamic scaling with target tracking. Target tracking works just like a thermostat in your home or a cruise control in your car. All you've got to do is select the metric, for example, CPU utilization, and then select the target value for the metric. For example, you know that your application works well as long as the CPU does not go beyond 50%. So that's what you set it at. From there, target tracking takes care of the rest. You can also set up dynamic scaling using step scaling policies. If for any reason you need finer grain control, you can manually set up the alarm thresholds, the alarms, and then the steps as to how much capacity you want to add when the alarm breaches. The last is predictive scaling. This is something we launched just last month. So target tracking, as we saw, adds or removes capacity in response to the load changes. Predictive scaling uses machine learning and models that have been trained using billions of data points we have from Amazon.com, using which it looks at your historical load and predicts what it's going to be in the future, and then in turn proactively provisions the EC2 capacity. This works extremely well in combination with target tracking. Now let's dive right into how the EC2 functionality is available and works with EC2 autoscaling. In the past, if I had wanted to leverage the stability of on-demand instances with the cost savings of spot instances, I had to create and maintain multiple ASGs, essentially getting myself into this situation here. I have one ASG that uses C4 large on-demand instances that my application runs best on, but I have also created additional two ASGs to use M4 and M5 spot instances to turbo boost my application. And I've given myself the challenge and operational burden of having to duplicate and monitor my application configuration across 3 separate ASGs. But now I can mix and match my purchase options and instance types within the same ASG. In other words, I can now set up my ASG to launch on-demand and spot instances, as well as diversify across instance types. Going back to my earlier application, now I can have a single ASG that contains the C4 large on-demand and M4, M5 large spot instances, and I no longer need to maintain 3 ASGs. But besides eliminating the operational overhead, there are a couple of more reasons why you would want to use this feature. First, you can set up some amount of base on-demand capacity and then scale up capacity whenever necessary using spot instances to save up to 90% on compute cost. Second, if your application is launching thousands of instances and can run on multiple instance types, you can specify all the instance types that work for you, and ASG will get you that capacity by mixing and matching the instance types and purchase options to get you that capacity at the lowest price. Let's now talk a bit about how to set up ASGs to include multiple purchase options and instance types. So we've added a new parameter called mixed instances policy to the create and update ASG APIs. There are a couple of components to the mixed instances policy, which is the launch template and the instances distribution. And I'll go through each in turn. The launch template is an EC2 resource type that was launched last year. Launch templates allow you to store the launch parameters, so you do not have to specify them every time you launch an instance. For example, you could define EC2 resources like the AMI, the security groups, and any network settings. The first section of the mixed instances policy defines the launch template to use for instance launches and the instance types to consider for launch. For those of you who are already using ASG, using launch configurations, this new feature is available only with launch templates. Launch templates are awesome. They provide great benefits for you to migrate to them. They are mutable, they are versioned, they provide access to all new EC2 features such as EBS tagging, T2, T3 unlimited feature, and this feature that we're talking about as well. And they can also be used across multiple services and not just auto-scaling as we saw with launch configurations. We have a tool in our console that I'll show you later that you can use to simply convert your launch configuration to launch template. The second section of my mixed instances policy then defines the diversification of my ASG across purchase options and instance types. Here is where I tell my ASG how many on-demand and spot instances to launch and which instance types work for me. I will explain the allocation strategy parameters in the next few slides, but focus on the other parameters on this slide, which are on-demand base capacity, on-demand percentage above base capacity, and spot max price. As I mentioned earlier, we still have the minimum and the maximum size bounding the ASG, and the desired size defining the current target number of running instances in the ASG. I can now additionally specify the minimum amount of this desired size I want as on-demand instances using the on-demand base capacity parameter. I then define how the remaining instances are split between on-demand and spot instances using the on-demand percentage above base capacity parameter. The spot max price allows me to specify the maximum unit price I am willing to pay for these spot instances. If I don't specify a maximum price, it's just going to default to capping at the on-demand price for that instance type. Let's walk through some examples of how on-demand base capacity and on-demand percentage above base capacity impact the type of instances in my ASG. So in this example, I've set my on-demand base capacity as 10 and on-demand percentage above base capacity as 50%. Now ASG will launch the first 10 instances as on-demand instances, and instances beyond that will be launched 50% as on-demand instances and 50% as spot instances. So when the desired capacity is 5, ASG will launch them as on-demand instances. When the desired capacity is 10, once again, it's going to launch another 5 instances as on-demand instances. Now, when the desired capacity gets to 20, in that case, it's going to launch the first 10 instances as on-demand, and then the other 10, it's going to split 50% on-demand instances and 50% spot instances. So in this case, it becomes 5 for on-demand and 5 for spot. So when the desired capacity is 20, you've got 15 on-demand instances and 5 spot instances. So essentially, you can use these two parameters to address different use cases. So say if you have 20 reserved instances which you want to provision first, and everything beyond that as spot, you can set the on-demand base capacity to be 20, and then you set the on-demand percentage above base as 0. Say if you want to always maintain a steady 60-40 split between your on-demand instances and spot instances, then you set the on-demand base capacity as 0, and you set the on-demand percentage above base capacity as 60, and that will get you the 60-40 split. And then if you say if you want to just launch spot instances, no on-demand instances, then all you've got to do is set both the on-demand base capacity as 0 and then the on-demand percentage above base capacity as 0 as well. Now, as the ASG scales up or down in response to manual, scheduled, dynamic, or predictive scaling, ASG will continue to maintain the ratios and splits that you've specified. Next, let's take a look at the allocation strategies. So no surprise, this new feature is built on top of Amazon EC2 fleets. EC2 fleets provisions capacity across multiple instance types according to the allocation strategies. And this new feature leverages the same allocation strategies used in EC2 fleets. So allocation strategies specify which instance types should be launched and which instance types should be terminated as your ASG scales. We currently support one on-demand allocation strategy and one spot allocation strategy. With the on-demand allocation strategy, we've got the prioritized allocation strategy. So instance types are chosen for launches in the order I listed in my mixed instances policy, and terminations prioritize instance types essentially in the opposite order. With the spot lowest price times n allocation strategy, I can set the spot instance pools parameter in my mixed instances policy, and ASG will diversify my spot instances across the n lowest price pools. So the number of spot instance pools to use depends on the availability needs of your application. For example, if you are running a batch processing and the latencies are not a concern, n could be set to 2 to maximize cost savings. But say if you are running a web service, n could be set to 10 to minimize the impact of any spot instance pools becoming temporarily unavailable. The ASG is also optimized according to the most current configuration of instance type overrides each time it scales up or scales down. That is, if, for example, you modify the instance types in your ASG evolves to align with the new configuration. On a scale-up event, the ASG would launch instances which are according to the new instance types. In the example on the right, I started with M4 and M5 instance types, but modified the ASG to use M5 and C5 instance types later. On the next launch, M5 and C5 instance types are launched. On a new scale down event, a new allocation strategy termination policy helps to prioritize the instances to terminate that best aligns the ASG with the current configuration. In the example on the right, M4 instance types are terminated first. Last thing I wanted to share before we get to the demo is around availability zone retargeting and rebalancing. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the best practices from an AWS well-architected perspective is to balance capacity across availability zones to reduce impact on availability if instances become unavailable in one AZ. When you create an ASG with multiple availability zones, autoscaling automatically balances your capacity across the availability zones that you've specified. An additional benefit that you get with ASG is, which is huge, that if there are failures in one availability zone, autoscaling will automatically retarget your instances to another availability zone. This functionality is no different for ASGs with multiple purchase options and instance types. So the on-demand and the spot portions of these ASGs are balanced independently. So what this really does is it allows the on-demand capacity to maintain balance across AZs, even if spot capacity is retargeted to another AZ due to low capacity or high prices. So let's just quickly walk through an example. So in this case, I've got on-demand instances and spot instances, which are spanning across two availability zones. And say the spot instances in the first availability zone are not available. So ASG is simply going to end up retargeting that spot capacity to the second availability zone, which does have them available. And once it's done, it will once again try to launch instances in the first availability zone. And as soon as it's successful, once again, it's just going to end up rebalancing the capacity across the availability zones. So with that, let's take a quick look at the demo as to how this works. So we can set up ASGs across multiple pricing options and instance types using the console, the SDK, the API, or the CLI. But for the purpose of this demo, I will be using the console. So the first thing we'll do is go to the EC2 console. And once we get there, we go into autoscaling groups. When I go to create a new autoscaling group, I get two options. One is the launch configuration. The other one is launch template. So I will choose launch template. As we discussed earlier, this feature is available only with launch templates. I already have a launch template set up, which is going to work with my ASG that I'm going to be creating. It already has the AMI, the base instance type, and the security groups, the key. So it's got all those parameters already in there. So once I select this launch template, I go to the next step and I will give my auto-scaling group a name. And then I will leave the launch template version. So launch templates, they allow you to provide, if you want to provide the default version, you can do that. If you wanted to always use the latest version to launch instances, you can do that as well. So in this case, I'm just going to leave it as default. And to unlock the new feature that we just talked about, I am going to click on Combine Purchase Options and Instances. So in the next step, I'm going to end up adding more instance types that work for me. So we saw that M4 large was already in there, so it automatically ended up pulling the base instance type that was specified in the launch template. I will add more instance types, so I'll add M5 large. I will add another one, which is C4 large, and I will add one more as C5 large. I can choose to keep the default settings for the instances distribution, but let's just take a look at what we have once we uncheck this. So we've got the on-demand allocation strategy, which is prioritized. For maximum spot price, I'm just going to leave that as default. I'm just going to let it cap as at the on-demand price. For the spot allocation strategy, I wanted to diversify across the two lowest priced spot pools. So I'm going to set that at 2. And then on-demand base, I'm going to leave that as 0. And for the on-demand percentage above base, I'll say I want to have a 60-40 split. So 60% on-demand instances and 40% spot instances. And I'll make my group size to be 10 instances. Next, I go ahead and select the subnets. So I'll span this ASG across 2 availability zones. So I've got one subnet in one availability zone and the other subnet in the other availability zone. Next, I'm going to configure the scaling policies. For the purpose of this demo, I'm not going to create any scaling policies, so I'm just going to go to the next step. For notifications as well, I'm just going to go to the next step. And if I want, I can tag my ASG and I can also propagate those tags to the instances that are launched. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it blank. I'm going to review the configuration and all looks good. And next, I'm going to go ahead and create the auto-scaling group. So let's take a look at the auto-scaling group that we just created. So here we can see on the left-hand side, all these new properties that have been introduced with this feature are available, the multiple instance types, the spot diversity, or the spot pools that need to be used, the on-demand base. So all the new settings, they're available on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side are all the settings which have been available in ASG before. Next, let's take a look at the instances that are being launched in this ASG. So I am going to filter for the ASG that we created, which is ASG Demo 2. So now here we can see that I had the split of 60-40. So we see that 6 instances have been launched as on-demand instances, and 4 instances have been launched as spot instances. Also, we can see that the on-demand instances have been launched as the M4 larges. This is what was specified as the highest priority instance type in the instance type list. And then we can see that for spot instances, we can see that in the first availability zone in US East 2A, we've got a C4 large and we've got a C5 large. So those were the two lowest priced instances available. So that's what has been launched. And then in US East 2B, we can see a M5 large and C4 large have been launched. And that's because in that availability zone, those are the instances that were at the cheapest price. And we can also see that the capacity is balanced across the two availability zones. So 5 instances in the first availability zone, and then the other 5 in the other availability zone. Next, let's quickly take a look at how you would take an existing ASG that is running on launch configurations, and how would you migrate that to be able to use multiple pricing options and instance types. So I've got this ASG which is using a launch configuration. So I'm going to go to the launch configurations page, and I will, after I select this launch configuration, this is the one-click step I was talking about, where you can take the launch configuration and just convert it to a launch template. So I'm going to call this sample LC_LT, and I'm going to click submit. And here we go. So now this launch template has been created. It's got the same properties as that were contained in the launch configuration. Now we go back to the auto-scaling groups. And I can go and edit this or ASG, and I will change this to launch template. And this is the launch template that we just created by converting the launch configuration to the launch template. Once again, I'm going to set the version as default. I'm going to combine purchase options and instances. I will go ahead and add more instance types. Once again, for the max spot price, I'm just going to leave that as the default. And this time, I'm just going to do a 50-50 split between on-demand and spot instances. And I will keep the capacity at 8 instances. And once I click save, the new configuration takes effect. And then over the next several minutes, we will see that the instances in this ASG, they end up aligning with the new configuration that we just specified. With that, I hope I was able to demonstrate how easy it is to get started and start saving costs right away. I would highly encourage you to create a new ASG or update your existing ASGs to start getting the benefits. With that, thank you very much for your time.